Good evening, everyone. Hi, and welcome to a very special webinar. Well, it's very special to me, as it's a subject I'm really passionate about. As you will be able to tell throughout the webinar, as I will get all hyper excited as only an ADHD person can. So welcome to the roller coaster of having ADHD as a woman. And it most certainly is a roller coaster for many reasons, including hormones and the ups and downs of life in general. This is me. I'm Vicky Leaney. I have a master's degree in applied positive psychology, and this is about what's right with people as opposed to what's wrong, positivity, hope, and resilience instead of a place of deficit, as psychology can often be. I'm also a certified resilience coach, and I am currently doing a PhD in mental health with a research focus on the gender bias in the diagnosis of ADHD, using myself as a case study. So, clearly, using myself as a case study, I have ADHD, my daughter has ADHD, and I work with people with ADHD, so I know a fair bit about ADHD. So the plan for tonight is an introduction to ADHD as a woman. Going to introduce you to the psychosocial model, a very basic intro, please don't worry about it. Hormones, executive function, which is the brain part of it all, and sort of gender roles and society and how that plays into everything to do with having ADHD. It's important to note that it'll be a whistle top tour. I want to provide you with as much information as possible without overloading you. And the webinar will be recorded, and I will send a replay link to you tomorrow. So, a disclaimer. Stereotype alert. I will be using stereotypes to put across important information. All the information in this webinar is evidence-based, as I am a PDHD researcher. However, for the purposes of simplifying the mass amount of information that I am going to be putting across to you this evening, I will be using stereotypes of male and female presentations of ADHD. I also want to clarify that when I refer to women in this webinar, that I'm referring to both individuals who identify as a woman and those individuals who have a menstrual cycle, as I'll be referring to both biological and sociological issues that will affect an individual's experience of ADHD. I take an all-inclusive approach and I accept all individuals as they are. So, what is ADHD? It used to be considered a behavioural condition not too long ago, and going back further still, it was at one time referred to as minimal brain damage disorder, which is lovely. Uh, it is not a new condition, and historical research has found mention of an attention disorder as far back as the 18th century. And we can probably all remember when we were growing up, it was considered a condition that boys had. You can imagine little boys swinging on their chairs. Although ADHD is still not fully understood, we have moved on from then. And at the moment, at this present time, this is how we are thinking of ADHD in the world of health research. It is commonly agreed again amongst researchers and clinicians that the main area of the brain affected is the prefrontal cortex. This is at the front of your brain, around where your forehead is. It's the newest part of the brain that is unique to humans, where we're able to use our imagination and think abstractly. And it can also be thought of as the CEO of your brain. And I will discuss this further in the executive function part of the webinar later on. Also commonly agreed upon is the importance of these two neurotransmitters, which are basically brain chemicals. And these are the neurotransmitters that ADHD medications work on. It's ADHD is now considered a neurodevelopmental disorder as opposed to an acquired mental health disorder, which is something that you develop over time, possibly from trauma. Um, and it's also now thought of as executive dysfunction. So when I refer to the executive function model later, this is what they are talking about. Although I don't really like the word dysfunction and try to use the word difference when possible. Now, this is a bit of an intense slide. Please don't worry too much about the information here. I wanted to show this to you as a simplified version. Believe it or not, this is a simplified version of the criteria that a mental health professional would use to diagnose ADHD. It's not the exact criteria, as that would take up several slides. And you've probably heard different terms or types of ADHD subtypes with words such as inattentive and combined type. And it's very rare that anyone would have just the impulsivity hyperactivity type. You would either be told that you are predominantly inattentive or you have the combined, just meaning that you have a little bit of all of the symptoms. It's super important to point out here that these criteria, even now in 2024, are based on research done on men and boys. It was not until the newer version of the DSM, which you can see to the right there, the diagnostic criteria, which is what are used by professionals, the new version in 2013, that even the mention of emotional dysregulation was included in the full criteria. And this has had a huge impact on the inclusion of many girls and women who would have previously not have been referred for diagnosis. So what would happen is you would have quite an intense interview process, and the professional would look at all these different symptoms, and they would say that if you had more than 5 symptoms per category in adults, who've had them for more than 6 months, they started before the age of 12 and are noticeable in more than 2 settings. So it can't just be that you only have these symptoms at home or only at work or school, because that would be pointing more towards an issue with that environment as opposed to it being an overall condition. Now, I don't want to go too much more into the diagnosis process here. This is just to give you an idea because I'm not a diagnostic specialist. I just work with people who either have been diagnosed with ADHD or think they have. Big stereotype alert. The gender differences between the presentation of ADHD in men and women. I should point out here that it's actually us as men and women that are different and not the condition ADHD. I mean by this that it's the same condition, but as men and women, we feel and show the symptoms differently based on our differing biologies and social expectations of us. Women tend to internalize their feelings, men tend to externalize, please bear in mind stereotyping. So women are more likely to be missed during childhood because they are very adept at masking and making it look like we are getting on with everything. We manage to get by at school or work because we think that is what we should be doing. And we think it's socially acceptable to be a certain way. But unfortunately, this leads to high amounts of self-harm and eating disorders in women with ADHD. We are also frequently misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder and or borderline personality disorder because there are so many similarities in the symptoms, and it's only over time that mental health professionals are becoming more aware of adult ADHD and are questioning your childhood and not just looking at the symptoms just now. But more often than not, because women are misdiagnosed and suffer for many, many years without realizing that there is a condition, that they're more likely to then suffer with autoimmune conditions and somatic disorders. These are pain disorders because our body has basically been in fight or flight mode for a really long time, and the stress hormones have actually been on overdrive for years and are causing physical issues in your body. Whereas men tend to be more openly disruptive, there tends to be more anger issues. They were the boys that were labelled as naughty at school. They tend to have more addiction issues. And again, please bear in mind I'm stereotyping. They are more often diagnosed with dyslexia and learning disorders in childhood, again, because they're so obvious about it, whereas girls are perhaps masking even those sides of things. And it is more likely that they will become involved in crime and perhaps even have a stint in prison. To introduce you to the biopsychosocial model. And as I said, this is a very basic introduction. Please don't worry about it too much. The real breaking it down to the components are that we're looking at it as biology, psychology, and sociology, and not just at biology, which is more often where a medical professional would obviously look. So this model was originally developed by Engel in 1977, and he thought that we should be looking at things differently as human beings, not just biology and not just disease, and by looking at us as a whole through biology, psychology, and sociology. Um, Generally, when we think of someone having uh, an illness, we think about medication, which is working on the biology of our body. Even when we think about mental health issues, the medication's working on the brain chemistry, not our thought processes. Um, so see that biology tends to be the physical health, the hormones and medication. The psychology is generally thought about our mental health, your emotions and behaviors. And sociology is about the culture we live in, our education, our race and gender, our religion, and our family and friends. All of these things make up who we are and what our experience of the world is. Taking this model further, I'm going to show you how ADHD could look like for a woman using this model. I was actually at a conference last week, which was specifically talking about adult ADHD and how we should be thinking about it as a multi-system condition, which plays really nicely into this biopsychosocial model. Um, and this is what my PhD research is based on. And the plan is to develop a specific feminist theory of ADHD to show future mental health professionals how they should be approaching female patients when considering a diagnosis of ADHD. When looking at the biological aspect, women with ADHD are more likely to have migraines, autoimmune conditions, somatic or chronic pain. This could be fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. Hypermobility is along the same vein, and IBS. Psychology wise, women are more likely to have anxiety and depression, eating disorders, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, and there is a high amount of self-harm, unfortunately, in particularly teenage girls with ADHD, because they feel that there's something wrong and they just don't understand what it is or why, and they resort to, unfortunately, hurting themselves. Moving into the sociology part of the model, we as women, unfortunately, even in a really progressive Western country, still experience gender role conflict, and I'll discuss it a little bit more in a moment. Discrimination can be in the workplace or misogyny, just in general. And we tend to take on the majority of the parenting role. Again, big stereotype alerts. As I said before, women with ADHD are more frequently misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder, as there is a lot of crossover in symptoms, particularly in extreme emotional dysregulation and rapid thoughts. It is possible to have a dual diagnosis, but it's more common for it to be a misdiagnosis, especially if symptoms do not get better with treatment. We could ask, does it matter if we receive a misdiagnosis? In a word, yes. The treatment for each of these conditions is very different, particularly the medication. If you are diagnosed with bipolar, you would likely be put on a mood stabilizer or an antipsychotic, which could exacerbate ADHD symptoms. Now, if you do actually have that disorder, you do have bipolar disorder, obviously it's important you are on those medications. So, of course, you need to make sure that you discuss any of this information with your psychiatrist or GP if it's something that you feel may be resonating with you. Um, Now we've got a bit of crossover between biology and the psychology. Insomnia, although it's can be biological in terms we can't fall asleep, it can most often be because there is some anxiety or something behind it. PMDD is premenstrual dysphoria disorder, and I'm going to be discussing that a bit more in a moment in the hormone part. ACEs is adverse childhood events or experiences, and it tends to cross over between sociology and psychology because it could be that you are brought up in a certain culture or background, or unfortunately, it could be that you are brought up with um, in a environment where there is neglect and abuse, and that would cause psychological issues. And then right in the middle, treatment sort of goes across all of them really because it's very much dependent on the symptoms of the individual. It's ADHD is not a one fits all condition or treatment because it's a cluster of symptoms that will depend on all of these things that make up the condition. So I'm going to move on to hormones. And when thinking of hormones in an individual with a womb or someone who has a menstrual cycle, we need to think across the whole lifespan. These are the main points in time across a lifespan when hormones would be particularly heightened. While we think about puberty probably being from around the age of 12-ish, my daughter is only 8 and she is already having serious issues with her emotional regulation. And when speaking to professionals about it, apparently there is a pre-puberty hormone surge from about the age of 8. So that's quite frightening, really. Um, the menstrual cycle is an obvious one, and I will discuss that a little bit more on the next slide. Perinatal is the period of time from conception of a baby up to when the child is 1 year old. During this time, the woman is obviously going to go through a great deal of hormonal changes, which will massively affect your brain chemicals. Women with ADHD are much more likely to have postnatal depression. So, this is something to definitely speak to your midwife or GP about if you have any concerns around this area. And in moving on to menopause, we need to actually think a bit before that. We actually need to think about perimenopause because menopause is was defined as from 1 year after your last period. So we're talking more in your 50s, whereas perimenopause can last up to 10 years before this. So this is most likely women in their 40s that are experiencing perimenopause. And quite often this is when women will say that they start to experience quite intense depression or anxiety, along with all the sort of physical aspects of hot flashes and things that can happen with the changes of our hormones. And this is a really common time. Actually, looking across this, puberty, perinatal, and perimenopause, menopause are the most common times for a woman to identify as or be diagnosed with ADHD because it's a point when it really exacerbates your hormones and your brain chemicals. taking a quick look at the actual menstrual cycle, I'm not going to go too much into all of them. I'm only going to focus on the estrogen and progesterone as the ones that we're most likely with. This is just an average 20-day menstrual cycle. Obviously, we all have different cycles, so this is just to give you an idea. So it's at the point of ovulation and during the luteal phase, that's the second part of your cycle, where women are most likely to experience an increase in ADHD symptoms. And this is due to the drop in estrogen, which is in the blue, and the rise of progesterone in the green. And this really plays quite a big number on our brain, to be honest. And to point out here that I should have mentioned in the when I was introducing you to what ADHD is and mention of the brain is that estrogen and progesterone, um, aren't just reproductive hormones. They actually permeate and affect every single system in our body, including our brain. So we need to stop trivializing the experiences of women when they have fluctuations in their menstrual cycle as just something to get on with. And yes, we do have to get on with it to a certain degree, obviously, because it's something we have for such a large part of our lives. But we do need to stop trivializing the fact that it affects our mental health, it affects our energy levels. It can cause a great deal of pain for some women, not just endometriosis, but just bad period pains. And I would strongly recommend to all individuals who have a menstrual cycle that you try cycle syncing and tracking your period and seeing where in your cycle you feel good and bad. I mean, good as well, because there are points in your menstrual cycle where you probably actually feel really quite invincible. And that is the time of the month when you should be booking in for, start some new projects, meetings with clients and stuff. Some women find an increase in their ADHD medication is necessary in the latter part of their cycle, and this is something that you would need to discuss with your GP or psychiatrist. It's also important to address the issue of PMS and PMDD here. So it's quite normal to have PMS in the last week or a few days before the start of your period. And this can be cramps and sore boobs and things like that. But mood swings, irritability, tiredness, insomnia, all of those things. But if you find that it's actually for longer than that, and we're looking at sort of the second half of your entire menstrual cycle, then we need to be thinking about the potential that it is more serious and that it may be premenstrual dysphoria disorder, because actually 45% of women with ADHD have PMDD. That's a huge number. And there are so many women who are just not getting the help that they really need. Um, and this is something that you really should discuss with your GP further, even if you haven't been diagnosed with ADHD and you feel that your what you thought were perhaps PMS symptoms are longer than a week. They're really severe. And I'm going to move on now to talk to you about how it is. We are talking much more severe, not just a bit PMSy. PMD is a serious condition and is only really being highlighted in recent years as a distinct mental health condition in in its own right. So insomnia, cravings, mood swings, depression, and I mean severe depression. You could be to the point of feeling suicidal for a few days every month, and that is not something that you should just be getting on with. Physical pain. So when I talked about chronic pain disorders, like I have fibromyalgia, I find that at certain times of my menstrual cycle that the pain is much worse, and fatigue as well. There are ways to relieve the symptoms, such as the combination contraceptive pill or the HRT patches from the age of 40 onwards, and possibly an antidepressant. So if you feel that you may have PMDD, I really strongly recommend that you speak to a GP or your psychiatrist, as this is not something that you should just merely be putting up with. So we're going to move on to executive function. And I mentioned before that the executive function is to do with the prefrontal cortex part of your brain, and we can think of it as the CEO of your brain. So understanding ADHD in women requires a multi-dimensional approach and examining not just the psychological symptoms, but also the biological and sociological. And Dr. Brown came up with a framework to explore the cognitive or brain parts through 6 clusters. And we're going to have a deeper look at each component and how it relates to women with ADHD, but also through the lens of a biological, psychological, and sociological perspective. The activation is about organizing, prioritizing, and initiating tasks. The biological aspects of activation difficulties in women with ADHD might include neurological pathways involved in planning and executing tasks. Research suggests that there might be a lower level of dopamine in individuals with ADHD, which affects their ability to initiate and organize tasks. Psychologically, women with ADHD may experience overwhelming anxiety or paralysis when faced with starting projects or tasks. And this often results from a fear of failure or criticism, which is much more pronounced in women due to past experiences of struggling with task initiation and our sensitivity to around what we feel, how people view us. Sociologically, women often face higher expectations to manage multiple roles, such as caregiver, professional, and household manager. And the inability to organize or prioritize effectively can then lead to significant stress and judgment from others, and reinforces our feelings of inadequacy and guilt. Focus is about focusing our attention, sustaining our attention, and then shifting it between tasks. Biologically, the attention difficulties of ADHD are linked to abnormalities in the brain's frontal lobe, which is crucial for attention management. Hormonal fluctuations may also exacerbate attention issues, as estrogen levels affect dopamine, as I've said before. Psychologically, constant internal criticism for not trying hard enough can exacerbate focus issues, in leading to decreased self-esteem and increased anxiety, particularly environments that require prolonged attention, such as meetings or lectures. From a sociological perspective, women with ADHD who struggle with focus may be misinterpreted as disinterested or less intelligent, impacting professional and academic opportunities, with cultural stereotypes that expect women to be naturally detail oriented and organized, further compounding this stigma. Effort. Biologically, the effort exerted by women with ADHD might be impacted by an inefficient use of neural resources, making the sustained mental effort more exhausting. And this can be due to slower processing speeds and a greater need for the cognitive or brain resources to perform the tasks at a comparable level to others without ADHD. The psychological impact includes feelings of frustration and fatigue from having to work harder to keep up with everyone else. And this can lead to avoidance of tasks that require sustained mental effort, further affecting our personal and professional growth. Sociologically, the need for sustained effort and the slow processing speed can lead women to fall behind in certain environments that prize quick thinking and multitasking, such as certain workplaces. And this exacerbates feelings of underachievement and social isolation. Emotions, we're looking at the emotional dysregulation seen in ADHD and the biological basis would be the neurotransmitter systems, particularly dopamine and serotonin being the feel-good mood, and they affect the mood stability and or impulse control. Women with ADHD often experience intense emotions and might struggle with emotional impulsivity. This could lead to moments of intense anger or despair, and this can strain relationships and lead to a misunderstood emotional profile of a person. Emotionally, women are often held to higher standards of emotional control. When women with ADHD fail to meet these standards, we are often criticised more harshly than men are, leading to increased stress and potential social withdrawal. So when I'm talking about meeting the same standards, obviously stereotype alert again, women are expected to be emotional in terms of possibly crying or being emotionally overt like that. But when it comes to anger, that's not socially acceptable for women, sorry. And that means that we may be judged more for having an anger outburst than a man would be. Memory, biologically, ADHD involves deficits in our working memory because, like I said, all our hormones affect every part of our body, including our brains, so likely linked to the prefrontal lobe dysfunctions, and this affects how information is held in our mind and then used effectively. The psychological toll includes difficulties with self-confidence, as women may feel unreliable or incapable, frequently forgetful, and lead to stress and anxiety about personal and professional responsibilities. And sociologically, forgetfulness and unreliability can impact a woman's reputation in both personal and professional spheres, often leading to negative judgments and reduced opportunities for advancement or trust. This is where women are quite often called scatty, a bit of an airbrain, which obviously is not very nice. Action. So this is actually about the following through biologically, impulsivity and poor self-regulation in ADHD are linked to an underactive behavioral inhibition system in the brain, leading to difficulties in controlling our actions according to the situation. Psychologically, impulsivity can result in feelings of regret and self-reproach, particularly after impulsive decisions have a negative consequence. This can be seen in uh, risky sexual behavior, sleeping one night stands unprotected, or impulsive shopping, gambling. On a sociological level, women with impulse controls of ADHD face greater criticism for behaviors that deviate from the expected norms of deliberateness, especially in a conservative or highly structured setting, by examining each of Brown's model through these lenses, we can gain a richer understanding of the unique challenges faced by women with ADHD and highlighting the need for targeted strategies that address these diverse impacts. As I said earlier, I attended a 3-day conference last week in central London that was all about ADHD. And there was a symposium about women and ADHD, and this simply means a session with several talks on one subject. While they were all very interesting, but they all seemed to be focused on biology differences between men and women, and I felt quite let down by the lack of discussion around societal expectations of women. And I really want to sort of highlight this issue to you because it does have a real effect on our experience of having ADHD. So think about gender roles and thinking, who am I? When we think about gender roles or just roles in general, who am I? So I am a woman. I'm a career woman. I have my own business. I'm a mother. I have a daughter. I am a friend. and I'm a wife. The problem is that at times these roles can conflict with each other. And this can be the case when an employer asks you to stay late, but you actually have to go and pick your child up from nursery. This could impact your prospects of a promotion. What about if your husband believes his work is more important than yours, even if your job actually brings in more money than his? Who is the person then in that situation who has to leave work on time to pick up the children? Generally, this is the mother, yes, but why? Is it because our gender role expectations are so deeply ingrained in us that we actually think that it is what we want to do? Or is it biology? What about your best friend wanting to go away on a girls' weekend and you can't go either because you need to be at home with the kids or you are working all weekend to prove to your boss that you are deserving of that promotion? We're always having to make decisions about what is more important at any given time. And our roles or different parts of our lives really play into this. Add into this ADHD symptoms, and things can become very overwhelming. So, socialization is the process through which individuals learn what the norms and values and how everything works in the society that they live in, so that this makes us more cohesive as a society and helps us function and all these kinds of things. Well, that's the theory anyway. And our first part of socialization mostly comes from the home with our parents or whoever lives in the house with us. But as soon as we leave the house, even when we're still a newborn baby in a pram, or we're dropped off at 2 years old at an amazing Montessori nursery, we are socialized every step of the way. We can hear things, we can see things, we pick up conversations from other people. You go to a nursery and we're going to be socialized by the people that work there. We're going to be socialized by TV programs. So here I can show you mass media, the politics of the country you live in, the culture, the religion that your family take part in, your neighborhood, so your immediate neighborhood could be the people that potentially your children are hanging out with, family, the school, peers. These are all things that give us an idea of how we should be acting in our society. And it starts from the moment we are born and is still happening to us now because our minds, our thoughts, everything are molded by everything around us. And yes, we do have, a right to disagree with some of these things, but even that's only in comparison to what is the norm. I don't agree with the norm in this culture. So it's all linked together. So please remember that I am purposely stereotyping to highlight important issues surrounding the expectations put on women, in addition to often working full time. Fully aware that there are very hands-on fathers and husbands. The statistics I'm going to show you here are only representative of different sex relationships, not same-sex relationships. There isn't so much research done on that. Um, but women do 65% of the housework. Women spend on average 265 minutes per day caring for children under 5, while men spend 149 minutes. So this equates to women doing 2/3 of the childcare. Um, about 91% of women with children spend at least an hour per day on housework, compared with only 30% of men with children. In April to June 2021, 3 in 4 mothers with dependent children, so 75.6%, were in work in the UK while doing all of these other things. Women report doing 36 hours of life admin and household tasks per week, and that's equivalent to a full-time job, while men report doing 27 hours a week. There's a difference of 9 hours a week. That's a typical working day. Now, this is a really difficult one because invisible work or life admin, what I'm referring to here are things that my husband once wasn't even aware that I did. He just thought the fairies did them. Booking in doctor's appointments, booking in after school club, booking in play dates and play schemes for the holidays from school, making sure that everything is put in the bag each day for the child if they've got some different activity going on that day, permission slips, birthday cards, booking a restaurant for Saturday, um, doing the Tesco online shop. I mean, the list can go on and on and on. My husband hadn't really thought about the fact that I do all these additional things, making phone calls about an error with our council tax, or just so many different things that we just have to pick up slack for generally because we're the one that is trying to keep everything together in the house. Again, please bear in mind, I am stereotyping. So, what next? Do I need a diagnosis? Now, this is completely up to you, and it will depend on whether your symptoms are causing serious disruption to your everyday life. As I am sure that you are all fully aware that the waiting lists are currently horrendously long. I can't definitively answer this question for you. However, I will say that if you're considering medication as a treatment option, then you will obviously need to go down the route of diagnosis. If it is more coping strategies, then I would suggest starting with an ADHD coach. You could always put your name on the waiting list and then work with a coach in the meantime. The other thing to mention is that the government in the UK do offer an access to work grant that can be used for ADHD coaching. Although they state that a diagnosis is not necessary, it would, of course, help your case or your claim. So if you were on the waiting list, you could apply for the grant, which is also quite a long process, although not as long as the waiting list to be diagnosed, and describe how your symptoms affect you and your ability to carry out your job. You may be given some funding to help with ADHD coaching. I don't want to go too much into the diagnosis process, as I said before, as I am not trained in assessing individuals. I will, however, say this last thing. If you can go private, then I suggest that you do, as this will speed everything up and will release NHS appointments for those who are unable to go private. There is also the right to choose option, where you have the right to choose a different NHS trust or even sometimes private providers with a shorter waiting list. And I will send links to everything I've just discussed, everything in the webinar, but particularly about diagnosis, in an email to you all tomorrow with the replay link. What can we do? Well, this is where my brand new group coaching program comes in. So I strongly believe that psychoeducation and peer support are both key to developing coping strategies for women with ADHD. Therefore, I am launching my pilot program next month and I'm looking for 8 women to take part. So you'll see there is a QR code on the slide. If you want to go straight through to the page on my website, you can go straight there now. I will, however, send all of the details in my email tomorrow with the replay link. But I will just take you briefly through what the program is now. You will have a one-to-one session, just me and you, to kick-start your transformation. You will then have 6 fortnightly group coaching sessions with the other 7 women in the group of 8, which will each be 90 minutes long and will be via Zoom. Each session, or we could call it a module, because they will have a theme each week, will include 20 minutes of pre-learning. And this can be, you can take it in either through video, audio, or transcript, because I feel very strongly that particularly people with ADHD, take in information in different ways. So I want to provide information in different ways so that you can engage in it as suits you. There will be an assignment to be completed in between sessions, and it won't just be a pointless task. It will be something that we have discussed in the coaching sessions and will be something that you can actually use in your everyday life. You will be partnered with another person on the program who will be your accountability buddy, and you will help each other to make sure that you are following through with anything that you've said that you will, in a very kind and supportive way. And there will be a WhatsApp group. So these are all the dates on screen now. The sessions will take place every 2 weeks in order to allow the participants time to engage with the learning from the previous session. As I said, the sessions will be through Zoom. And as you can see, I've made sure that all of the sessions are scheduled outside of the school holidays. As it is the pilot programme, I am offering it at a significantly reduced rate of £500, which can be paid in 3 monthly instalments of £175, if that would be helpful. If you're not in a position to consider my programme at the moment, don't forget to sign up for my Facebook group, ADHD Hers, which I will send out the link, works on my signature for my email when my email comes tomorrow. It's just a supportive group of women with ADHD and sharing tips and strategies. And obviously I offer some of my tips and strategies in there. And that's it. So if you have any questions, please put them in the comments and I will answer them now. Thank you.
Hi, I'm here if you have any questions. I've been keeping an eye on the chat and I haven't seen any questions as yet, so I will stick around for a few moments. If not, please feel free to email me any questions you may have. I appreciate you may not want to ask me specific questions in the comments on here. So like I said, I'll stick around for a moment. I want to say thank you for everyone who has joined. Okay, got some questions coming through. So I've been diagnosed at 54 and realised I've got burnouts. Yes, burnout is really common, particularly women. It tends to be like a cycle of you are working really, really hard, whether that's actual a job or with parenting, and it's almost like you're carrying on as if there's nothing else going on, and then it becomes too much and you have burnout, and that's really common. And I'm sorry to hear that, Sophie, that that's how you're feeling. It is really common, and I really feel for you because that's something I experience. So I mean, feel free to get in contact with me if you want any help with that. For a clear and useful word, can you please explain the ACEs? So it's adverse childhood events or experiences. So basically, the idea is that People who have unfortunately during childhood perhaps experienced abuse or neglect, or it could be even as simple as parents having a divorce. It's anything that could be seen as a negative, difficult experience for a child. And the idea is that this could then affect you in adulthood and could cause potentially psychological, even physical conditions. So it's something that needs to be taken seriously as well. I hope that answers that for you, Danielle. Thank you. You're welcome. Okay, so I can see that most people have now left, and I can't see any more questions coming through. I will say goodbye for now, and thank you so much. And I will send you all a replay link tomorrow. And please just feel free to message me at any point with any questions that you have. Thank you very much. Bye.